My name is Gaia Botticelli, and if someone else had recently told me that I would find myself in a similar situation, sitting in a sterile office, opposite the CEO of a company for whom I sacrificed everything I had, with my hands shaking with anticipation and an emptiness in my chest, I probably would have. She shook her head with a soft smile and, without even bothering with irony, would have continued to write code, improve algorithms, optimize architecture, not imagining how quickly even the most carefully constructed dreams can crumble. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you're watching this video. Enjoy watching. A year and a half ago, I did something that would have seemed crazy to many. I left Microsoft, a company with an impeccable reputation, a confident future and, to be honest, a very comfortable salary, to join a young, daring, and hopeful startup called Titan Tech, in which I saw not just another technology project, but a platform where my idea could finally take shape, shine, and change the world. I spent 18 months trying, step by step, piece by piece, as if assembling a fragile mosaic structure, to create what was supposed to be a new word in cybersecurity, a system called Sentinel Shield. The idea was born long before I joined Titan Tech, when, watching the endless cycle of attacks and retaliatory measures, I realized that the fight against cyber threats is an eternal lag, and the only way to break out of it is to teach artificial intelligence to predict the actions of intruders even before they even launch an attack. Sentinel Shield, named by me after the ancient mythological guardians, whose vigilance knew no bounds, was really capable of doing this. It analyzed digital patterns, found patterns, detected the slightest deviations from the norm and drew conclusions faster than the human eye could blink. I worked on it 7 days a week, 80 hours a week, almost forgetting what sunlight looks like outside the laboratory windows and how my voice sounds without distortion through the headset. David Marchesi, CEO of Titan Tech, appeared rarely, always on schedule, with that same cold corporate smile that never reached his eyes. His visits were short and predictable. He asked questions, made polite remarks, praised my progress, and always ended the sentence the same way: "Brilliant job, Gaia. The board is delighted with your progress." Of course, I smiled back, although inwardly I always remained wary. Something about him from the very beginning made me feel a sense of hidden danger, as if he were not a person, but a mannequin artfully sewn from someone else's intentions, only feigning interest. And so, 3 days ago, I finally reached the critical point that I had been heading towards for all these long months. For the first time, Sentinel Shield intercepted an imitation of a complex cyber attack. It not only recognized it, but prevented it without waiting for the operator's signal. And it wasn't just a success, it was a breakthrough. The system discovered vulnerabilities that I didn't even know about, and it did so based on its own analysis, without direct programming, without instructions. She was learning, evolving. Inspired, with my heart pounding in my throat, I immediately went to David's assistant, Barbara, to set up an appointment. She glanced at her tightly packed schedule and, with some effort, squeezed me into a 15-minute window the next morning. I stayed up most of the night preparing the demo, updating the presentation, choosing words that would not only convey the scale of what happened, but also penetrate the bureaucratic armor of the corporation, make them see what I saw. The next morning, when I entered David's office, the feeling of anxiety that had begun in the elevator intensified. His face was stripped of its usual mask of warm indifference, and next to him sat Andrea Fields, the company's chief legal advisor, a woman with eyes that reflected only paragraphs and sub-paragraphs. "Sit down, Gaia," David said calmly, pointing to the chair opposite. "Andrew's just here for formality." Something in his voice, devoid of its former cloying politeness, made me cringe, as if I were standing on the edge of something bottomless. I sat down, carefully placing my laptop on the table, ready to turn on the demo at any moment. "Before we discuss Sentinel Shield," David continued, pushing a folder of documents towards me, "we need to clarify some issues regarding your contract." Section 14.3, Andrea began, expressionlessly, as if she were reading aloud excerpts from an obituary, states that any intellectual property developed using the company's resources is the property of Titan Tech. I nodded. Of course, I knew this condition. I knew, but I didn't think it would be used against me. "I understand," I said. "But Sentinel Shield is my personal project, the idea of which was born long before I joined Titan Tech. I have the documents to prove it." Andrea didn't even blink. Maybe you had an idea, she said evenly. But it was fully implemented already here, on the company's resources. Let's be honest, Gaia. David's voice became hard, devoid of any shades of falsehood. Sentinel Shield belongs to Titan Tech. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. The board believes that your compensation package is more than fair. Compensation package? I asked, frowning, feeling the rage that had been pent up for a long time rising from the depths. Your contract includes a bonus for success, he replied with a thin, almost mocking smile. After the launch of Sentinel Shield, you will receive a one-time payment of $300,000. More than generous, you must admit, especially by industry standards. The words hit me like a lash, unexpectedly and with a ferocity that would be hard to attribute to just a formal conversation. $300,000 for an intelligent system that, according to the most conservative estimates, could bring in billions annually, and which cost me 18 months of incessant work, sleepless nights, thousands of pages of drafts, hundreds of experiments, failures, insights, one ruined romance, and an almost complete oblivion of what personal life means. All of this is my innovation, my blood, my mind, my passion. David, ignoring the growing rage inside me, continued, as if not noticing that his words were thudding in my temples, in every cell of my body, as if he were just voicing the agenda. Tomorrow I will present the Sentinel Shield to our key investors. We expect to raise an additional $75 million in funding, after which we will make an official announcement about Titan Tech's revolutionary cybersecurity solution. I didn't take my eyes off his face, trying to remain calm, even though everything was already boiling inside. My fingers involuntarily clenched into fists, my nails dug into my palms, as if only pain could keep me from screaming. Are you firing me? My voice was flat, almost mechanical, as if I wasn't asking a question, but simply stating the inevitable. We're not firing you, Andrea interjected with the same sterile efficiency as before. We're just transferring you immediately. Of course, with a bonus. Congratulations, Gaia. David, smiling like a predator who has just caught his prey, added, your employment relationship with the company is officially over. He didn't understand. He didn't know that I had anticipated this moment. He couldn't have guessed that she had already read the script of this betrayal a long time ago. Sentinel Shield? Yes, legally it probably belonged to Titan Tech, and I knew it. I knew that the standard wording in the contract, Clause 14.3, gives everything created within the walls of the company to the company itself. I should have been outraged. I should have caused a scandal, sued, thrown a tantrum. But I didn't do it. I suddenly felt a strange, almost meditative calmness. They expected resistance, they were ready for it, but what they weren't ready for was that I was ready too. 6 months earlier, I noticed unauthorized activity on my secure development server. Someone from the inner circle of the company, or rather, David, gained access to my personal repositories. Externally, nothing was changed, nothing was stolen, but the alarm was triggered. From that moment on, I began to build additional layers of security into Sentinel Shield, not only from external intrusion, but also from internal threats, especially those coming from those at the helm. I nodded, keeping my expression perfectly neutral, and handed my laptop to Mr. Marchesi as if nothing had happened. Sure, I said calmly, good luck with your investor presentation tomorrow. 2 guards, summoned by Barbara's restrained gesture, escorted me to my office, keeping an eye on my every move, as if I could pull a nuclear code out of a drawer. I packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box, a cup with the Women in AI logo, a photo from the university, several books, a couple of flash drives, a notebook with my sketches. Everything seemed so insignificant, almost toy-like. I left the building carrying the box as the last trace of my former life, just like any other corporate trash. But unlike most, I didn't leave empty-handed. I grinned, remembering the piece of code that I had embedded in the Sentinel Shield presentation build. 10 minutes after the start of the demonstration, it was supposed to activate. I didn't feel any panic or anger that night. I wasn't planning revenge. I ordered food from my favorite Vietnamese restaurant on the corner, sat down on the couch, wrapped myself in a blanket and turned on the TV series Mindless, which always helped me disconnect from everything. I watched as the characters indifferently solved far-fetched problems, as if everything that was happening in my life was part of the same plot. I waited. At exactly 9:30 p.m., the phone rang. It was Barbara. "Gaia, he wants to see you," she said without greeting, her voice strained but restrained. "He says it's urgent." I looked at my watch. "It's almost 10 o'clock. "The car is already on its way," she added. 40 minutes later, I was back at Titan Tech. I was shown into the sleek conference room, where demonstrations and strategic briefings usually took place. David was sitting alone at the head of a long table, his immaculate appearance disrupted. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, his face was pale and exhausted, the veins on his temple were swollen with tension. He clearly did not leave the screen, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. As soon as the door closed behind me, he jerked his head up and spat out words full of rage. "Fix it." I slowly settled into the chair, deliberately slowly, to let him feel the full weight of the pause. "Fix what exactly?" I asked with an innocent half-smile. "I don't work here anymore." He gritted his teeth. "Don't play games, Gaia. We saw how you sabotaged the demonstration." I raised an eyebrow. "How?" "I haven't been in the building for almost a day. I was accompanied by security. I couldn't take anything out. I didn't connect to any of the systems." David slammed his palm on the table, his voice trembling with anger. "The test run ruined the entire demo. Sentinel's shield started flagging threats that don't exist, and the system generated thousands of false positives, which completely discredited the project." I tilted my head to the side. "It sounds like a technical problem," I said flatly. "Have you tried restarting the system?" His face was red with rage. "It's not funny, Gaia. 12 major investors are coming tomorrow. There's $75 million at stake." I exhaled calmly. "Investors?" I repeated. "Good. Then I will fix your system. Right now." David took a deep breath, clearly forcing himself to regain his lost composure, and when his voice finally sounded again in the tense silence of the conference room, he had already regained that smooth, fascinatingly confident intonation, which, as I once saw from my own experience, served him as a weapon and shield at the same time, allowing him to persuade, to inspire, suppress, and conquer those who inadvertently or naively got too close. "Listen," he began, not looking me straight in the eye, but seeming to glide over the surface of what was happening. "Maybe we were too hasty yesterday. I am ready to discuss a fairer agreement, recognize you as a co-author, possibly increase the compensation package, consider allocating a share in the company's capital." I slowly leaned back in my chair, watching as he habitually played with words, trying to find a compromise that would give him a way out without losses. "What exactly happened during the test run?" I asked, not hiding my interest, because I knew the answer perfectly well, but I wanted to hear it from him. David hesitated, perhaps for the first time in our acquaintance, showing that he did not know where the safe line between frankness and disaster lay. "The system activated on its own," he finally said, choosing his words carefully. "She started identifying internal components of our network as potential threats. Then she generated hundreds of reports documenting what she called internal ethical violations." I couldn't help but smile. "Sentinel's shield is designed to detect threats, David," I said, looking straight into his eyes. "All threats. No exceptions." His face twitched for a moment. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice quieter and alarmed. "Nothing. I didn't sabotage anything. I just let Sentinel's shield do what it was created to do: analyze, learn, protect." During development, I fed him cases of cyber attacks, including situations where insiders posed the greatest danger. You do realize how often this happens, don't you? When the threat is not outside, but inside. His face turned white. Did you teach him to spy on us?" he gasped, barely able to pronounce the words. I shook my head. "I taught him to recognize threats, David. No matter where they come from. He's not a spy. He's a guardian. And he's doing what he has to do." David's face began to show the very expression I had been waiting for, a mixture of understanding and horror, the realization that his entire control system was no longer working for him. "So, he identified me?" he said faintly. I didn't answer. The answer was already in front of him. He straightened up abruptly. "You can't prove it. These are all words." Without changing my expression, I said, "I don't need to prove anything." Sentinel Shield documented everything itself. He had been logging for months. Every unauthorized access. Every file copy. Every change to the system settings. All actions are neatly organized in reports, including timestamps, access logs, and in some cases, even keyboard entries. He was trained in the best practices of digital forensics. Everything is already assembled. The whole picture. The silence that followed my words was ringing, heavy, and thick. David didn't take his eyes off me. Anger gave way to a new expression, cold, rational, the kind that appears on the face of a person who realizes that he is losing, but is still looking for at least some leverage. "What do you want?" he asked, and I noticed how his voice became sharper, as if every word was coming with an effort. I put my hands on the table. Full official recognition of my authorship as the creator and chief architect of Sentinel Shield. 50% of the rights to all related patents and intellectual property. A seat on the board of directors of Titan Tech to monitor how my system is being used. And $10 million in compensation for your unsuccessful attempt to squeeze me out of the project. He sucked in a deep breath, and I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. "This is extortion." I smiled faintly. "No, David," I replied softly, "this is a negotiation." Extortion is when someone secretly gains access to a private development, passes it off as his own, and then dismisses the author under the pretext of legal formalities. I could give these reports to the investors. But she didn't do it. Bye. He exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath for a long time, and fell silent, studying my face. The tension in his posture was replaced by inner disappointment. He lowered his shoulders, hunched over a little, as if for the first time he felt the weight of the consequences of his own decisions. "You have destroyed the system," he said dully. "Can you fix it before tomorrow?" I nodded. "The Sentinel Shield is not broken. He just excluded me from the chain of trusted nodes. Now he perceives all commands coming from the system as suspicious, because I am no longer on the list of authorized users. Restore my authorization, and it will stop blocking internal processes." I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out a tiny USB flash drive. She put it on the table, exactly between us. "Here's an update. It will restore the system's trust in all key nodes, including the control panel, which will allow the demo to run smoothly. Consider it a gesture of goodwill, as part of our future partnership. Contracts can be issued in the morning." He stared at the flash drive, then looked at me. "And if I refuse?" he asked. I met his gaze calmly. "Then Sentinel Shield will continue to block the demonstration. And reports, including those regarding ethical violations in the company's management, will end up in very interested hands for a moment." I thought he would argue, try to preserve the remnants of his authority, bargain for at least the illusion of control, but instead, with that humility that grows not from an admission of guilt, but from careful calculation, he slowly exhaled, and without taking his eyes off the flash drive, as if it were not just a data carrier, and with the last hope he could still rely on, he reached out and, almost unconsciously, took it away. "You planned this all out," he muttered, and his voice wasn't accusing, not surprised, but rather resigned, as if all this had been a foregone conclusion long before the first exchange of words took place between us in that lab. I didn't triumph, I didn't emphasize my superiority, I just allowed myself a light, ironic smile. "No," I replied, "I was hoping it wouldn't be necessary. But after I found your trail on my secure server 6 months ago, I realized that not only Sentinel Shield needed protection, but I needed it myself." His gaze became as sharp as a scalpel, and I could see a chain of thoughts sliding through his mind, leading to the inevitable question. "How did you know that I would try to cut you out?" I got up and picked up my bag from the chair, taking my time to give him time to absorb the answer. "I didn't know for sure," I said calmly. But Sentinel's shield was created to recognize patterns of behavior and predict threats before they materialize. I think part of this ability has been passed on to its creator. The next morning began with clear skies and steady silence, as if reality itself understood that there was more at stake than just the presentation of a new technology. I arrived at Titan Tech without haste, in a business suit chosen with the expectation of effect, strict lines, restrained colors, but not a shadow of submission. David, in his unfailing manner, introduced me to investors as co-founder and chief technology officer, and as always, his trademark smile remained an artificial curve of his lips, not affecting a single muscle on his face. The demonstration went flawlessly. Sentinel's shield reacted to each of the simulated attacks with almost frightening accuracy, identifying the threat, determining the invasion route, neutralizing it with such speed and grace, as if it were a carefully staged performance, and not the algorithmic work of a complex artificial intelligence system. One of the investors, a man with a face that reflected both skepticism and professional greed for discoveries, turned to David, hardly hiding his delight. "It's an amazing system. What inspired its development?" he asked with such excitement, as if he was going to immediately invest his entire fund. David froze for a moment, and this pause was not so much a reflection as a confession. This short moment was enough for me to feel the taste of triumph, bitter like coffee without sugar, but therefore no less sweet. Then, barely hiding his inner annoyance, he replied, "This is Gaia's vision. From the very beginning, Titan Tech only provided the environment for its implementation." I smiled discreetly and smoothly moved on to the technical details, answering questions, clarifying the architecture and demonstrating how deep the system was worked out. As I was talking, my phone vibrated in my pocket. One short notice: Sentinel's shield authentication has been restored. The threat has been neutralized. The integrity of the system has been confirmed. The creator's protection is active. Artificial intelligence was learning faster than I expected. He not only recognized the threat, he assessed the risks, adapted his structure, and protected the future, his own and mine, exactly as it was intended. 3 months later, Sentinel's shield was implemented for the first time in real infrastructure, in one of the largest international banking networks, which was under threat of a complex cyber attack. The attack, if successful, would have caused an estimated $340 million in damage, undermined confidence in the global financial system, and caused a chain reaction among other players. Instead, it was stopped even before the attackers had time to infiltrate the network. Sentinel's shield identified the scheme, compared it with internal templates, applied protective measures, and isolated the threat. From that moment on, it became more than just a product. It became a symbol of a new era of digital security. David and I have established a business relationship based on mutual necessity. He focused on company development, working with venture funds, presentations, and negotiations, where his charisma, albeit fictitious, worked to its fullest potential. I, in turn, became the head of the technical innovation department, where my experience, analytical thinking, and strategic vision were not only useful, they became the backbone on which the entire product development architecture was now based. We didn't become friends. And we never will be. But we found a balance, unstable, sometimes uncomfortable, but working. Sometimes I asked myself if I could have acted differently, to sue, to fight through legal channels, to cause a wave of public pressure. But deep down, I knew, I've created something too powerful to allow even someone as influential as David Marchesi, to have complete control over it. I have integrated not only algorithms into the system, but also my own principles. His betrayal, though expected, showed me something important, much more fundamental than banal corporate greed. It demonstrated that technology is only as ethical as those who run it are ethical. This realization became the core of the new Sentinel Shield implementation policy. Each installation now includes strict transparency protocols, ethical control mechanisms, and internal fences that can prevent any deviation from the stated goals. Sentinel Shield doesn't just protect networks. He's protecting himself. It protects its users. And, if necessary, he will protect his creators. From everyone. Even from the inside. Last week, as we stood on stage under the blinding spotlight, cheering and celebrating the successful public offering of Sentinel Shield on the stock exchange, and the company's market capitalization soared to $4 billion. I caught the eyes of colleagues, investors, and journalists, those who have been following technological trends for years and looking for the next breakthrough point. And in their eyes I saw a mixture of respect, curiosity, and uncertainty, because not everyone is able to recognize the power born not only of the mind, but also of the experience of struggle. That evening, during an open-air buffet, when the light of the garlands was reflected in champagne glasses, a young developer approached me. She had a confident step, but there was still a youthful awe in her voice before the opportunity to ask an important question. "What is the secret," she asked, "of creating something so revolutionary?" Her eyes burned with a sincere desire to understand. I smiled, and without pausing, I replied, "The secret is not in the code. He is in understanding." The biggest security threats often come from where you least expect them. The real challenge was not just to create the technology, but to ensure that it could adapt, evolve, and defend itself without betraying its own foundation. I paused to give weight to the words, and then added, "Create systems that can not only react, but also think." Not just to recognize the threat, but to understand where it comes from, to adapt, remaining true to its core, ethics, principles, integrity. The developer nodded, lowering her gaze in thought, and I automatically checked my phone, where a restrained but persistent notification from Sentinel Shield flashed. The integrity of the system has been confirmed. The threat has been neutralized. Protection is active. He was still studying. He still knew who his creator was. And he was still standing guard, as he had planned, as he had chosen, as I had taught him. Now that so much time has passed, and the storm that betrayal once raised has subsided, I want to hear from you. Because after everything that happened, after trying to erase me from the history of my own creation, I came out on the other shore, not only whole, but also stronger. I'm not just a developer anymore. I am the architect of my future. But I didn't do it alone. I had an experience. I had instincts. And, most importantly, I had a conviction to defend what is rightfully mine. Now I want to know, what would you do in my place? Would you fight back through the courts? Left and started everything from scratch? Do you think it was the right choice for me to keep control but stay in the system where they were trying to eliminate me? Tell me about it. Tell us about your stories when you have faced betrayal at work or in life. When you were underestimated, they tried to take away the fruits of your labor, but you found the strength to say no. Share this experience. Share your thoughts, because such stories matter. If I've learned one important lesson in all these months, it's this: you have to protect what you're building, whether it's a career, an idea, personal boundaries, or even a small project that you've been building from scratch. You are your first line of defense. Never assume that others will act in good faith just because you do. Prepare for the worst, but tune in for the best. Think about your life. Is there a place where you need to draw the line? Where should you demand recognition, respect, or just honest treatment? Maybe it's about your profession, personal relationships, or an idea you've been nurturing for years. Don't let anyone take away from you what you have created. Here's my challenge to you: stand up for yourself. Leave a comment. Let's start a conversation, a real, lively one, about how to protect what is rightfully ours.